All right, Joseph, let's dig right in. Tell us about the origins of UniTaskr and what inspired you to create this platform.
Cool. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. So my background, a little bit unconventional. Following finishing school, didn't want to go straight to university. So I went straight to South Africa, where I actually worked and trained as a safari ranger. Following an incredible year abroad, I decided to study animal genetics at university. Now, it was in my first year and my co-founder's second year that we stumbled into, I guess, what was and still remains to be the student financial crisis. You see, at the time, a number of our peers were either A, graduating, yet lacked the experience to go into their sector of choice, or B, having to leave university or college because they couldn't afford the cost of living. Now, for me, that felt like a pivotal flaw in the current education to employment gap, and I wanted to make a difference.
So you talk about your co-founder. I know that you're not a technical guy. Did you bring in a technical co-founder, or how did you guys kind of figure out the right mix of talent for each of you?
It's a great question. To be quite frank with you, it took us a long time to get to that point. It's hard launching a tech company without a technical co-founder, and my co-founder and I had to go through, a number of challenges to get to the point that we are today. Firstly, we looked at assigning an agency to build our first MVP. We were led down, to believe that we had to go down one route. It's not to say there's one route for everyone. That route that we were suggested at the time was perhaps the wrong route. It led to us building a product that was incredibly pretty, I want to say, but highly, it lacked a lot of userability. The interface was nice, but retention was incredibly low because it wasn't built with purpose. It was built with design at the forefront, which was a hard lesson. Having spent 3 years practically building that initial product, we practically had to chuck it down the toilet, given that we had to pivot the concept. And at the time, we didn't have the funds in place to rebuild our new vision. So that was the first challenge that we faced, really. Then, because we had run out of funds practically, we looked at recruiting a technical co-founder to come on board and join myself and my Ollie, my main co-founder, to rebuild this product. We went with gut instinct because, again, we both lacked the technical know-how to know whether or not this was the right person to rebuild this vision. Worked with him for a number of months under a lot of false promises. And ultimately, he left us a little bit in the lurch, whereby we got an email one day saying, "Hey guys, so I've decided I'm actually going to head off to South Africa." And, we were a year past our due date to get back to market. So we found an additional agency to come back in and basically rebuild the product and help us take it to launch. Now, I'd like to say we're in a really, really strong position. We have a CTO who heads up our technical department alongside my co-founder, Ollie, who heads up our product, alongside a team of senior developers that are ultimately helping us build our vision forward.
So what's the lesson learned there for other founders?
Do your due diligence. It is one thing. There's a fine line between gut instinct and fact. Finding, that line is incredibly important. Going out and doing research, essentially making yourself as well, understand the industry as best as you can prior to making any, impactful decisions. I'd say, I think had we spent more time perhaps digging into which route to necessarily go down, we perhaps would have, fast tracked our success.
Yeah, and how did you find the right CTO or the ultimately right talent to bring your vision to life?
Exactly that. It was a combination between finding someone that bought into the vision and understood, more so than, what was required from a technical standpoint, the impact that we wanted to have with the product, but also had the right amount of experience behind them to execute on the plans that we needed to achieve that goal. Which is, an incredibly challenging thing as a startup. Often you're balancing, between cash and what you'd like to be able to do. So finding that person isn't necessarily easy. There's a lot of conversations to be had, but it's, one that you shouldn't jump into too hastily, because you can end up going down a very, dark road with the wrong people if, you don't find that right person.
Was it somebody in your network that you found? Was it through referral? Was it just kind of blind luck that got you the person? Like, how did you ultimately end up finding that right CTO?
Yeah, so I mean, fortunately, it actually came about through a recruiter who had a close relationship with one of our employees at the time. So it was, we were very lucky. But having taken on board the learnings that we had previously, we're in a good position to understand what that right person looked like. And I'm glad that we made that decision because our CTO, Travis, he's fantastic, alongside the rest of our development team.
Yeah, I see so many non-technical founders or co-founding teams, whatever it might be, making that path where they outsource tech, right? It might be they hire a firm that's really great at front end, like you guys did initially. It might be they hire the wrong firm entirely, or maybe they get lucky. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, I'm not good at this, so let me find the right way to outsource this. And it's such a core piece of being a tech company that it's really hard to rely on somebody else entirely to bring your vision to life.
Definitely.
Right?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And look, I think if, Ollie and I had known the challenges that were in front of us early on in our journey, we would have worked a lot harder towards finding a technical co-founder to come on board from the offset. It perhaps would have mitigated a lot of the challenges that we were up against, going down that path without one. So that's a strong piece of advice there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good piece of advice. All right, so we kind of breezed past what it is that you guys do at UniTaskr, and I know you've been through a few what I would call product pivots, right? Over the course of the years. Talk a little bit about what the company does and how it's evolved over time to get you to the point where you're doing so wonderful today.
Yeah, so we pivoted a number of times over the years. So the initial product that we launched was actually called UniDosh, and it was a student-to-student product. We realized, having tried to get the platform trading for a number of years, that students, incredibly hungry to earn money, super receptive to picking up tasks, do not want to spend it. Bit of a flaw in the initial concept, and boy, did we try everything. We at the time we focused on services such as DJs, after party cleaners, whatever we could. Book a DJ, we'll give you a free after party cleaner, anything we could to get this community trading, and it just wasn't quite there. But they were so hungry to earn and to learn. So that led to the change, the initial pivot, which was opening up essentially the buying side of the platform to members of the public and businesses so they could harness this workforce, ultimately bringing in, income from where the income was. That took us, quite a while to get back to market. Initially took us a year longer than we had anticipated, in which time we lost practically every user that we had spent 3 years prior building. But I'd like to say that this time we started from experience as opposed to scratch. So that was pivot one, and that was an incredibly interesting time for us. It was quite daunting, especially that period while the app was down for a year, because we had spent 3 years working on this project, and suddenly, we were again left reliant on developers to help us get back to market. So we had to keep ourselves entertained. We launched a number of small other businesses in that time frame, actually, to keep ourselves busy. And then the next pivot was ultimately on the platform at this point, both households and businesses could post jobs. We were primarily, running our marketing towards households, in the sense that we thought, cleaners, gardeners, dog walkers, whatever it may be, students have an abundance of time surrounding their studies. We then found, quite quickly that students, desired more experience-led work surrounding their studies as opposed to quick wins. Also, the value, of the tasks themselves were a lot greater when it came from businesses as opposed to households. A student could be paid 500 quid to help rebuild a website, for example. So with that in mind, and also the scalability factor, in the sense that when you're an in-person based task force, such as cleaners, gardeners, you need to practically have feet on the ground in every city or state, that you launch in, which is a challenge in itself, because your marketing has to work even harder for you. Whereas when we pivoted to focusing on business services, and primarily remote business services, our scale went from us being accessible in 3 cities to practically every city in the UK within the space of 6 months. And we've been able to replicate a similar model to that in the US.
So is it typically a business that's signing up for an account and hiring business services? Like, is that who you're ultimately selling to, is companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyone from a freelancer that requires an extra hand to an SME. SMEs are absolutely our primary market. Between the UK and the US, there's 38 million businesses, of which 37 million are classed as small businesses. These are the guys that ultimately require our support. We've got a workforce of students here with a wealth of knowledge and, modern day knowledge. We'd argue that the students are digital first. They've grown up in this newfound generation and they're adaptable. So being able to offer businesses this resource that is students in a way that can better prepare the future of, our generational workforce is something quite powerful.
So it's students on one hand of one side of the platform, right? The supply, and then the demand side is small businesses, freelancers who need an extra pair of hands, whatever it might be. What got you to the point where you have students as the core focus on the supply side?
If the honest truth is, it's where we started. It was the mission, that we led out to achieve. For me, what success looks like, I don't want a single student to ever have to graduate and not have the relative experience they need to go into their sector of choice. I don't want a student to ever have to leave university or college because they can't afford the cost of living. Like, to me, that's change, and that's what I set out to achieve. Not to mention, it's an enormous, market in its own right. So that's the reason that we kept true to those kind of core values.
So if I'm not a student, there's no way for me to sign up for the platform.
Not to earn money, but we'd be more than happy to have you on tasking our students.
Sure. No, that's great. So is the go to market on the supply side then focused on relationships with schools and community groups and things like that, or is it all direct?
Not at all. This is where things get quite interesting. So for years and years, my co-founder and I tried to find the best way to get people onto our app. And again, we tried everything: Google, Meta, PPC, billboard campaigns, and nothing quite hit the mark for us. Now, one day, in comes my little sister, 17 at the time, I believe. And she goes, "Joseph, TikTok, it's kind of a big thing. We should really post a bit more about UniTaskr on TikTok." Hence TikTok hat. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Give it a go. She went away. 5 minutes later, she comes back. She's made this very short tutorial on the UniTaskr app. She goes, "Can I post it on TikTok?" Sure, go for it. She posts this video on TikTok. Within the space of an hour, it's got 10,000 views. 2 hours, 20,000 views. 3 hours, 50,000 views. Never had we seen so much traffic in the 5 years prior to us ultimately trying to grow this business. It was this explosion of virality that ultimately came from a student, my sister, posting about the product. So then we looked at ultimately how we could harness our wider workforce to replicate just that. We realized that essentially we stumbled into the movement of the nano influencer, an everyday person who, when you can combine that group value, has enormous potential for growth. Sure. And today, because of that growth, we looked at how we could replicate that for other brands. We now have a separate entity connected to UniTaskr called Shout, whereby we harness that same workforce of students, but as an army of nano influencers, content creators, and market research panelists. Last year, we were announced by TikTok as having the largest network of nano influencers in the world. We've got 150,000 on our books with over 500 million combined followers. And we've worked with anywhere up to 12 unicorns now to support them in their growth.
Wow. That's incredible, man. So that explains the supply side, right? How about on the demand side? Like what customer acquisition, what does customer acquisition look like in getting businesses and other folks on the platform?
Yeah. So ultimately, it's very intent-based, right? I think, there's an awful lot of awareness that needs to be established with any marketplace in the sense that someone might not necessarily need you at that given point of time, but you want them to be aware of you for when they do. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of awareness driven activity that we'll run to build up the brand's reputation. There's a big focus on PR, strategy, thought leadership pieces. CSR is of big importance to us. We do a lot to support local communities. When we launched in Manchester a couple of years back, we partnered with the Central Food Bank, whereby for every initial new user registering to the platform, we donate a food parcel, having one of our students deliver that food parcel to the food bank. Through COVID, thank you, man. Through COVID, we re-engineered our technology to become better suited for hyper-localized delivery tasks, so that those more vulnerable or those more isolated could essentially have this workforce on tap to help them with deliveries and errands. We had over 20,000 students step forward to help their local communities at that point in time. We always try and put big presence there. When it comes to pure conversion, it's very intent-led, in the sense that, Google search plays a really big part for us. Ultimately, if someone's looking for a blogger or a designer or, a website builder, we want to come, be first in mind when they're searching for that.
So what are some of the key metrics that are most important to you guys in terms of the success of customer acquisition efforts, whether that's on the supply or the demand side? Are there any really, focused metrics that you guys track?
Definitely. We track absolutely everything. We're always looking to beat our numbers across the board. I think for me, what our goal is, we intend to build the biggest student community in the world. So user acquisition and getting the right cost per install, for example, upon a student app member is incredibly important to us to build up that in-depth community. The way we retain students on the platform and build on that value add is through, jobs that we provide, whether it be through our own business subscribers. We've got a direct partnership with LinkedIn whereby we funnel in graduate entry-level positions into UniTaskr from LinkedIn. We also have these shout-orientated campaigns with creators. That's how we build value. But for us, it's about building this database of students to heights that have never been reached by anyone else. And, I had a conversation with TikTok the other day, and they identified that UniTaskr's cost per install for a student is perhaps the lowest cost per install out of any app running any ad on TikTok. We have built a machine for growth, and that's our biggest focus.
So it sounds like data-driven is kind of in your guys' DNA for product development.
It's in my middle name.
Yeah, no, that's great. So when you going back to some of the pivots that you mentioned earlier, what was it about your final pivots and the outcomes associated with that has really driven such significant growth from you guys? Because I know it's not just a TikTok campaign, right? It's not just one thing that comes out of it, but like what was it that really fueled your growth?
Yeah, so definitely that shift to focusing primarily on remote services as opposed to in person, as I said before, that was a really big factor in the sense that we didn't need to have feet on the ground for us to scale our database. We suddenly, could scale at a much faster rate. That's one thing. Also being able to replicate the model for growth in the sense that, we practically run hundreds of thousands of shout outs, for ourselves alongside other brands. We have a very good understanding of what works, what doesn't. But in building that database, we've been able to establish organic growth cycles as well that trigger further growth. If you can get to a position where for every student that signs up or every customer that signs up, an additional 3 customers sign up as a result, now that's powerful.
Yeah. And I read something like 70% or so of teams of business teams will have remote workers by 2024 as a more of a stabilization, not from a macro climate change, but just from a general way of doing business shift.
Definitely.
Are there any other trends that around remote or around distributed teams that UniTaskr is paying really special attention to as it relates to any of the markets that you're serving?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, I think, post-COVID, the world changed. People became far more susceptible to the new way of working. The gig economy has been on the rise even before that. I think for us, whilst that's an interesting stat, really 70%, 100% of my current workforce are the future of our workforce, which is why it's so important to get them trained up. Marketing is a really good example. You could study a 3-year marketing degree. For you to get a job at practically any agency, you'd require 2 years minimum experience. If the system's broken and it doesn't make sense, So I think that for us is the thing that we're trying to change. We're obviously keeping very much in line with the way that the world's moving, but we're trying to establish our own footprint. And I think through brands and, individuals paying greater homage towards what is the future of us, I think that we'll all be in a better position down the line.
So how are you guys using the UniTaskr platform for your own remote distributed team?
Yeah. So, I mean, funnily enough, like in the early days when my co-founder Ollie and I started, we used students for practically everything, flyering, logo design, building out our website. We still use students. We run focus groups on the app. We run shout out campaigns with students on the app. Occasionally, if we need some data entry done, we'll utilize the platform. It's so handy to have that workforce on tap. And, you never know when you're going to need it, but it's good to have it there when you do.
So I know you guys got your footing there in the UK, but after some nice regional expansion where you went city by city, or region by region or area by area, you have now decided to, start to make some international plans. Is that right?
Absolutely. About 6 months back, we incorporated UniTaskr LLC in the States. We've seen exponential growth. We've seen anywhere up to 50,000 members now joining the platform.
Wow.
Individuals are coming in at a rapid rate. Between the UK and the US, we're signing up anywhere up to 1,000 new members a day, which is super exciting. And US students are taking to it really nicely as well. Unlike US businesses, we had a company sign up earlier, a new business subscriber earlier today. I believe they're called Air, actually set up by Michael Jordan and his son. And they've just posted a task looking to recruit college ambassadors. Like for me, that's so cool. I'm over the pond here in London right now, and to see a task being posted out there and for US students to be applying, it's impactful. It's really cool.
Well, you're probably going to need to get some sort of sponsorship from Air Jordan himself, if that's the case.
Absolutely. If you're listening,
MJ, 23.
Come on, MJ.
Nice. So, when you guys are thinking about the US versus the UK, right? Because this is an interesting, we don't talk too much about US versus other countries in terms of market expansion, because most of our guests are US based. It's usually the opposite direction, right? So when you're thinking about expanding to the US, what are some of the considerations that you underwent to determine, yes, it is time for us to expand to the US?
I think the sheer market in its own right was a big, decision because of the nature of our business and the ability to scale, given that we are primarily a remote workforce. We didn't need to have feet on the ground again to be able to launch into a new state, which was because ultimately we could have a student in, Ohio picking up a task for a business, in New York. So that was one thing. Actually, how difficult it would be for us to scale was one question. Outside of that, actually understanding the wider market itself, our business is as susceptible towards tasking students. We ran a lot of market research, a lot of surveys, having funds to ultimately allocate towards that expansion, which fortunately, because we work with a lot of large entities in the UK that also have establishments in the US, we were able to drive immediate business in the US. So it made the decision, quite simple for us. It just gave us the ability to ultimately scale our revenue, scale our growth opportunity. And it's a move that our investors have wanted to see for a while. They've wanted to know whether or not it could be replicated elsewhere. But we had to achieve what we'd achieved in the UK for us to have the guidance and the understanding as to which direction to go.
Makes sense. As you entered the US market, what challenges did you begin to encounter that you hadn't before, and how were you able to adapt your strategy to overcome them?
I think one of them being the tax system. It's very different. Ultimately, in the UK, we have one tax code for the UK, like in terms of like income tax, or not income tax, sorry, like revenue tax, etc. Whereas I'm aware, obviously, in the US, there's different tax codes for every different state. So that was an interesting hurdle for us to get around. Getting the company incorporated in the right way was also challenging. How we split out our share options essentially between the UK and the US entity. Hiring in the US was again another challenge. Where do you hire? The base living wage. So we're based out in LA, which we made the decision to do so on the factor. Whilst it wouldn't be the immediate choice, given that there's not so much of a crossover between the UK and Pacific time, it actually allows us to be able to practically work 24/7 in the sense that when our UK team clock off, our UK team clock on. So it's worked quite favorably for us. But yeah, don't get me wrong. There's been a lot of challenges, a lot of learnings along the way. We're still going through a number of those challenges. Right now, we're still very much finding our footing.
So, like, what are some of the challenges that you guys are still undergoing, and how are you working through those?
Yeah, so like, for example, one of the challenges is the actual mindset behind a lot of the students, specifically the student creators that we work with out in the US. It's a very different mentality between UK students and US students, in the sense that for a US student, they're very cautious about the brand and how they're perceived by their peers and what they represent, as opposed to UK students who are, to be quite frank, a little happier to, take perhaps a lower payday to earn a bit of cash. So, when it comes to working with influencers in the US, we're practically having to spend 3 times, that we'd spend in the UK. So that's been a really interesting challenge for us to overcome. It's involved, remodeling how we position it to clients. If we're on certain quota with clients in the UK that we're also working with the US, mitigating the fact that actually the US is going to be a more expensive market for you to run, advertisement across. So that's been definitely a current challenge that we're underpinning. Other than that,
so basically, we're too privileged in the US. Just to sum that up.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks. That was a lot of waffle to get to exactly that. So yeah, no, spot on. No, it's super interesting. There are new things that come up every day, but we're slowly weathering the storm, and it's exciting. The growth's fast. It's fast paced, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, you say slowly weathering the storm. I think you're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour through the storm.
It's constant. It's a constant.
Yeah, you guys have experienced so much tremendous growth that I'm sure your leadership style has had to evolve and grow as the company's evolved and grown. Can you talk a little bit about what ways or how you've needed to grow as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been really interesting, if I'm very honest. Personally, whilst I've had work experience, my first job was working as a trainee barber. Then I worked in Africa as a conservationist and safari ranger. I think I'm well cultured for sure, but I never had the experience of working within a larger institution. I think often there's people have kind of pushed towards believing there's a fixed way of doing things, and I'd kind of argue that having not done that, it gave me the opportunity to build things in a way that I would want to see working, how I would want to be treated if I had a boss, for example. So I think integrity comes massively into it. And look, there's been a lot of hardships along the way. There's a lot of lessons, that I've taken, in the sense that I believe, at the beginning, I'd speak a lot about myself and not so much about us. I think, in my early days, I had the perception that I needed to be a boss. And there's a very big difference between being a boss and being a leader. A boss will dictate, a leader will work alongside you. And that was a lesson, that I had to really come to grips with. And, now I very much, I'm very incredibly motivational with my team. It's very important that they have transparency as to where we're at without inflating the truth, and that they're, bought into the vision and where we're going. And I think if you can work with a team in a way that, they can add value, you can add value to them, you'll set yourself up for longer term success.
Is there a leadership mistake or failure, or I would call it probably a leadership opportunity that you made along the way that you've learned from, and something that other founders can learn from as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few. So, I mean, firstly, understanding when someone's not the right fit. I think often, you build personal relationships with people outside of necessarily a work relationship, especially when you're a small team. But when someone's not the right fit, it can be so detrimental to the business, the toxicity that comes with that person being unhappy within their role. And it might not be because they're a bad person. They could be a great person, but it's just not the right fit. But them feeling negative in their day to day has such a spin-off effect on morale across the wider team, which has a wider spin-off on culture. And if you don't tackle it in the right time frame, it can be a real downfall. We had periods of time where one person would leave because, again, they were acting quite toxic, and then they ended up quitting. But then because they quit, others, felt the need that they then needed to follow and quit alongside them. And it can create a chain effect quite quickly. So, for us, actually installing, an appraisal process, that was a big learning for me. I'd never worked in, as I said, I've never worked in an organization outside of this. So I didn't even understand the importance of actually running appraisals. But having a quarterly appraisal where, we have a touch point with each employee, they have an opportunity to discuss things that perhaps they want to discuss, being able to run through a performance review and setting key milestones in place as to what they want to succeed, not only do you have a better understanding of how everyone feels within their day-to-day roles, and where perhaps there's improvement to be had from a management perspective, but equally you have the capability to manage people out if they're not achieving on those goals and the morale's not where it needs to be.
Yeah. And to your point, just because they don't have, quote unquote, the stuff for your organization doesn't mean they don't have a different kind of stuff for somewhere else, right? There's a place for everyone in this world, and it's kind of your job
100%.
as the owner of the business, as the CEO of the business, to make sure they find that, even if it's not at your home, at your home base, right? So how do you counsel out? Like, how do you manage that when you establish that somebody is not a fit?
Yeah. And also further to that point, just because, they don't, necessarily have the right stuff, it might be that they don't have the right stuff within one given role, but actually given the opportunity to shift into another role could actually thrive within the organization. And, I've seen this time and time again. We have a campaign manager called Alex. He was a great campaign manager, but he felt quite stagnant in his role. He wanted the opportunity to progress and he wanted to change. We ended up shifting his position into more of an SDR role where he has flourished. It's incredible. He's practically cut down our cost per acquisition for new leads by 90%. And it's because he's now happy in his day-to-day role. So I think it's also, finding that it's a fine line. I think, given dependent on your relationship with the individual as well, it's sometimes important to warrant whether or not there is a better place for them within the organization. And, if the answer is no, that's one thing, then it's about managing them out in the right way that, doesn't become toxic for other employees. But yeah, that'd be my input.
Yeah, so on that's great input. On the flip side, I'm sure that's also helped to inform decisions on hiring, right? So how has hiring as a whole evolved at UniTaskr to make sure that you get as much of the right fit into the organization as possible?
Yeah, definitely. I think, at the time, early days, we'd hire, quick, because we had a lack of experience perhaps, and there were jobs that needed to be done. So we definitely space that out a lot more now. We're a lot more conservative in terms of when we do hire, but also make sure that we have the right time frame to do so in a way that we're going to find the right person, as you suggest. Culture is a massive thing for us. It's incredibly important that someone fits in within that culture. If they don't, because, I've had employees that are fantastic employees, but they never quite gel with the rest of the team. They wouldn't attend socials or whatever have you. And that's quite an important part for me within my team. It's not to say it's an important element for every team, but, we're a young team. The average age in my company probably sits around 24. We're a young team, and we like to, go out and have fun occasionally. And, it's important that we have people around us that want to get involved in those activities, because if they don't, it just can create somewhat of a barrier between people within the workspace.
Yeah. Question for you that I actually just thought of as it relates to trends in your business. So there's this massive trend of open learning curriculum, right? Where folks are taking courses online at their own pace, not necessarily through a university or through a college, but their own learning. On your platform, do you allow folks like that to be able to participate, or is it just formal university students?
Good question. And yes, absolutely, we do. We work with students from the ages of 16 through to 25. By no means am I saying university is the absolute way that absolutely everyone needs to go down. Myself, it wasn't necessarily the route. I left halfway through studying an animal genetics degree to launch this company. So I understand that there's not one path in life. We work with college students directly, at open university students. We work with students that are still trying to find what that next chapter is. And it's important for me that, people understand that, we're here to help students as a whole, not necessarily, just students in higher education that are enrolled in higher educational institutions.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, for folks, for students, I almost call them kids, but for students that are figuring out what their path is, so many of them are switching to this open curriculum, and they also have more time probably than your average university student to perform jobs and want to perform jobs too. So I love that. When you look at UniTaskr in a couple years, right? What do you envision as what you guys have accomplished in a couple years, and how does that relate to some of the market trends that we've talked about?
Yeah, so for me, as I said before, it's about making change, which I feel very much like we're starting to do. In the UK alone, in the last couple of years, we've seen over £7 million worth of jobs offered to the UK student community. So for me, that's impact. When we're starting to make a change, but the scale has only just begun. I think for me, not only growing that mass community of students in a way that can help them better prepare for that next chapter in life, but actually having data to support that we have accomplished that is incredibly important to me.
Nice. Yeah. All right, let's close off on the Founder 5. This has been tremendously helpful. So 5 quick hit questions around your growth and UniTaskr's growth. So the first one is number one metric or KPI that you are relentlessly focused on.
Retention. We learned quite early that it's incredibly hard to get people in, let alone keep them. If you can keep them, you have to work less hard on getting new ones in.
Amazing, right? Top tip for growth stage founders like yourself.
Adaptability. Knowing when something's not working and being able to make the decision to make change in a short enough time frame. Often that can be the difference between impending failure and imminent success.
Absolutely, especially in an early stage or growth stage business, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Favorite book or podcast that has helped you to grow as a founder?
David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me. It's a bit unconventional. It's not necessarily an entrepreneur's book. It's a mindset book. And I think as a founder, you need to have an incredibly strong, durable mindset to be able to come up against the challenges that you're going to face. It's a roller coaster. And that book's helped me for sure.
We've been doing this show for about a year now, and that's the first time I've heard that one, and I love it. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
All right. Piece of advice that counters traditional wisdom.
Take that first step. Don't be afraid. Often life is daunting, but risk is required to make change.
Yeah, well said. And finally, what is going to be the title of your autobiography when you've accomplished all that you set out to achieve?
Mama made it.
Mama made it.
Mama made it. Let's go.
Oh man, that's great. So you've given so much to our listeners today, Joseph. Time for a little bit of self-promotion. How can those listening help you out on your journey?
Cool. Well, there's a number of facts. So we obviously we're fresh, in the US, so looking to make an impact. So please, whether you're a student looking to earn money and build experience, check out the app today. We're on iOS, Android, and web. Whether you're a business looking to increase efficiency, reduce your running costs, hire this incredible workforce that is at your fingertips. Aside from that, we are about to go for a fundraise in the next couple of months. So if you like what you've heard and you'd like to find out more, boy, do we have a journey to go ahead with, and we'd love to have you on that journey with us.
And what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you, Joseph?
Sure. Either reach out at accounts@unitaskr.com or via our intercom on our website, which is www.unitaskr.com. It's UNITASKR. Often people forget there's no E at the end. It's UniTaskr.
I love it. Yeah, no. Find a job, hire for a job, or maybe even just check out their awesome TikTok content. If you're interested as an investor, capital raise on the way for Joseph and team to fuel growth. Well done, Joseph, and thank you so much for joining us on The Dirt. Happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
You bet, man.